Okay, so let's start again. So welcome to SAFPAC Seminar, and we have here Onel Brooks, who's doing a seminar on nature, psychoanalysis, and intoxication.
Okay, thank you. So this is in 3 parts, and the first part is of working with the client. So can that sort of stay between us? I'm not sure how that's going to work with the recording, and the client material that might come up. Please can we sort of keep that as confidential as we can. So the first bit is going to be the client work. The second is going to be how the themes that come up with the client might be thought about, or might sort of be, I'd say, refracted in nature and psychoanalysis. And the third is about the film, The Philadelphia Story, and what that's got to do with anything at all. And what I would like to do is it's not just read and read. You lose the will to live if I did that. So I plan to sort of read and speak for about 20 minutes at the most, and then shut up for at least 10 minutes so that we can talk at least 3 times. So if I start off with the client. The young woman I'm meeting for psychotherapy for the first time tells me that she's a bit down, a bit flat. She tells me about living with a group of girls who are part of a larger social group, and about having a job after university. And it tells me about some of the girls have boyfriends, and how she spends a lot of time with another girl in the group. And I think she's telling me that she doesn't have a boyfriend. And I wonder if this other girl is a girlfriend or a girlfriend. And I'm also find myself wanting to be quite careful about saying too much to her or asking her too much. I'm wondering myself if I'm probably overdoing it. Maybe I should ask her. And she's introduced, according to me, she's introduced boys and girls and living together, which means that she's introduced something about sexuality and people being together. She tells me also, as if in passing, that she usually stays away from men and boys. At university, at work, and socially, they don't notice her, and she's afraid of them. So she avoids them. She sounds mournful and regretful, and it is also as if she's saying that she is relieved and she's achieved something. I don't know what she means by notice, but I notice that she's told me that she does not usually talk to men or boys. So I say something like, and yet here you are talking to a man. So with a little smile, she explains that she knew my name must be a woman's name. She knew it. And her confession and her smile, feels as if it's something amusing for her. I smiled too, and she, I think, begins to lighten up a bit. She smiles a bit more. And of course, I don't ask her what exactly she's smiling about, because I think this feels like a change in what's happening between us, a thawing out. And from here on, we fall into something which my usually very reliable memory doesn't really allow me to remember, which I think is always interesting. And does that mean that we were sort of caught up in something? Does that mean there are things I don't want to remember? I can't tell you, of course. After more comments on my strange name and talking about girls and boys, she eventually gets onto her parents. And of course, some of this is my doing, that I'm sitting talking to her, and I'm kind of encouraging her, and I'm interested in things. And I'm sure she probably picks up that I could be quite interested in parents and things like that. And I suppose I don't need to tell you as a group that words are spoken in a context, and there are gestures that accompany it, glances, and there are all kinds of complicated things that I think go on between us, as go on between all people. And I think also as goes on in this film that we will eventually talk about a bit. And as she seems to be speaking very freely, the words, memories seem to tumble from her mouth, and I have a sense of her coming to life, showing me that she's intelligent, interesting, what wants to say. I shut up and listen. So mixed in with things about her mum and her dad and growing up, where she grew up, how they lived, a very happy childhood, she begins to tell me about the fridge that they had when the fridge was delivered by two men, what the men were like, what happened during the delivery, and so on. And then something, I say uncanny, seems to take hold of us. She speaks, and she's speaking, and I'm sort of visualizing this scene of these workmen and the fridge and all the sort of details that she's telling me. And then there's another digression within the story, within the digression, and it is all rather strange but interesting. And I wander along with her, interested in this rich, spontaneous eruption of stories and details, which is a digression within a digression. I'm told about what the fridge, what was usually in the fridge, and she begins a story about going to the fridge on one occasion, opening the door, and suddenly she stops herself and, as if returning to herself, and says, "Why am I talking about the fridge?" And I wonder out loud, what do you make of it? She claims, "I have no idea." It looks baffled. Now, I'm not seeking the empirical truth of what happened, the correspondence to what really took place, whether there were two delivery men or three, or whether the fridge was really quite a status, that fridge was quite a status symbol back then. I'm interested in what she conveys, in how she seems to remember, and in what we might make together of her telling this to me now. Even if it's a dream or a false memory or a lie, why is she saying that to me now? It's my thought. And I experienced this speech of hers, or what she was telling me, this set of stories and details, as I say, an intoxicating interlude. It's a sign of sensuous spell that seems to bind us both. But rather than trying to vanquish and banish it with a counterspell, I mean something like, let's get back on message and try to talk about what we should be talking about. I want to get closer to this rather strange thing that's happened. So I say to her, I don't know why you're talking about the fridge, but I think the fridge might be thought about as a way of talking about your life at home. Materially, things were fine. You had things that were nice, and all looked fine from the outside. But like the fridge, that was usually empty, there was something lacking in terms of warmth and nourishment. But now that feels a bit risky to me, and I expect her to say to me, "I don't know what you're talking about." And perhaps what I should learn to expect is that things don't happen as I expect. Anyway, she says to me, "I see why you might say that," but she talks about how in her early childhood, she and her dad were very close. She was always playing with her dad and testing what is her physical and intellectual strength against him. I feel that she's telling me, no, I did get some warmth and nourishment from my father. So whatever you said is wrong. And then somewhere in all this, she says to me, and Dad was big like you. And of course, it didn't escape me that there was perhaps something going on about Dad in the room with me. And I say to her, that sounds important. And she says, what she does is she keeps on talking as if she's driving too fast. And the last thing, she can't stop. So I don't try to make her stop. I just leave it and let her talk. And I feel when I sit with her that I begin to lose my confidence about what I said. And I don't know why. And I think now, when I look back, I think, well, there's a question, isn't it, about to what extent I was caught up in. I was carried away a bit, getting caught up a bit in a kind of interpretation of what it was. And I'm not saying that to say that I think the interpretation was wrong or useless. I'm just sort of saying maybe there's something about being caught up in something that, and I now wonder how much I'm caught up in my own sort of training, my education, my sense of what I'm supposed to be doing as a therapist in the room. And surely those sort of things are very powerful intoxicants, these ideas about what we ought to be doing, how we should think about things. I also thought much later that it's a bit like a teenage girl sitting with a father and wanting to say to him, no, you're quite wrong and you're a bit embarrassing, which happens a few times, I think. But she goes on to speak about becoming an adolescent and a dispute between her mother and her father, and her siding with her mother, telling her mother not to put up with what Dad is up to. And father, feeling outnumbered, leaves. He just leaves. He doesn't keep in touch with her. He just disappears. And her mother collapses, so she's there looking after her mother. And of course, then it seems to me that the whole stuff about the fridge and the mother who's collapsed and empty and has nothing to give, and the father who disappears and leaving the clients empty, bereft, cold, begins to make a bit more sense to me. And also the boys and girls theme, I begin to think about to what extent the girlfriend, who she is indicated is not in a good way emotionally, to what extent that there is something about the girlfriend and the mother. But again, I'm not saying that this is bad. I'm saying that again, you might think that I'm going down a line. I'm caught up in something which is about this means that, or this, this, I can see what stands for what. And again, I'm just trying to say to you, I don't think this is without its use. I think it's quite useful, but it also is what I'm trying to talk about getting sort of caught up in something, maybe. Now, I don't try to say any of this to her. My thoughts to her, I want her to say to me what she thinks about things. And I don't want to flood the session with things, my thoughts, clever or not. Glancing at my watch, I can see that the session has flown by and we don't have very much time left. And then I feel a twinge of anxiety about managing the ending, because I suddenly feel I've got to do quite a bit at the end. I need to stop her, but not abruptly, and speak to her about making another appointment so that we can continue what we started. And as this thought occurs to me, she's in full flight, not cryptic, careful, and concealed, as I think she was at the beginning, but alive, speaking freely and quickly, as if she has no doubt about finding words to mean and finding ears that might hear her. Suddenly, surprising and disruptive to her, I feel and see, as well as to me, another voice sounds in the room, so that both of us are shaken by it. From out of her mouth comes, as if suddenly compelled or commanded, the forceful words, "I must have another appointment." I say, "Of course, I was thinking that we need to sort this out." But somehow something has changed. And it's as if that shouldn't have come out. And as if she's in quite a state, partly about that. Of course, I don't know exactly what. She's experienced something as quite a disaster. And I just have a sense that I wasn't supposed to hear that. She wasn't supposed to hear it either. And she begins to weep, and she keeps weeping. And in spite of my trying to be clear with her about arranging another appointment the following week, and trying to discuss with her, if she can't make that appointment, how I could, there are other possibilities, and we could talk about that. She continues to weep. And I think it's right at the end. I've got another client coming very soon. And I think to myself, well, I have a vague sort of sense of something has happened, which is about a rupture. But I'm too much in it to think of how to interpret it. And then I think interpreting it wouldn't be a good idea, really. Actually. So she weeps, she leaves, and she doesn't come back. She doesn't come the next week. I contact her to find out what's happened. She doesn't respond. I've never seen her. So that's the client material. I'll pick up some of the themes in a minute, but give you a chance to say something if you want.
I know, I'm struck by one of the things that you said, that at one point you felt carried away. And I just had this image of the fridge being carried and the men, and in the same session something about Dad leaving, and I just, something about Dad being carried away. And it maybe, not so much about the content of the story, which is what you're saying, you're recognizing it's not about them, but just about the story and getting carried away. And her almost like, because you were saying you were frightened of flooding, the again, fridge thing, if you don't plug it in, obviously, and the mother was in floods of tears. Yeah, so I'm just thinking about, and then at the end, although you were thinking, I'm going to say, when should we meet again? She gets there first.
She gets there first.
Yeah.
In a panic.
Yeah, in a panic. Yeah, and I just wonder if there's something about, she's reliving the whole her dad being carried away kind of thing.
Well, you're right, and I write about that a bit later because I do think that that's one of the things that's going on. There's something about me and Dad. And there's something about the end of the session with me and Dad disappearing. That's really sort of too powerful. And takes me by surprise too, because I didn't expect that she was going to have such a response.
Yeah, maybe her dad didn't either. Who knows? I mean, if she ever comes back, it'd be interesting to explain. Thank you. Really interesting. Really.
And the fridge is something where the fridge is such a mysterious object, isn't it? Because it's completely it's shut and it's cold, so it's kind of frigid as well.
It's the word that was in my mind, frigid.
Yeah, but then once you open it, then there is light and there is like delicacies, Yeah, so and the two men carrying.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and and I think the whole thing about being carried away and how condensed the material is I think that's related. That there's a story about two men, and in some ways, the two men, I was thinking, they sound like Mum and Dad. Just just how she describes them, and the thought which I perhaps didn't emphasize enough is that the fridge is actually empty most of the times. There's only a little bit of food in it, you know, a bit of cheese or whatever, but not much else. So there's something about this grand fridge they've got, which is a great status symbol. That you open it up, there isn't actually any food.
Direct.
Not quite about the story, but I wonder if you could say more about the digression in the digression. That I found that really interesting.
Well, I mean, there's limits to how much I can remember of the digression, but there's a story about how the men took the fridge up on some trolley and tried to get it up the stairs, and some problem happened when they went down the stairs. And there's one of them who was actually quite tall and really quite sort of, you know, sociable and jovial, and there was another one who was really quite withdrawn and sort of quiet and didn't interact. And I was thinking, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing.
I don't know why, but I almost kind of saw something ceremonial in these two men, these two masculine figures bringing in this sort of monolithic artifact, you know, this big kind of masculine object, you know, and it's sort of being put there, but it's empty. And maybe something about Dad being this masculine monolithic figure, but also being quite empty. But yeah, it seemed almost religious or something. Just that ceremony of bringing it in, one of them being quite quiet and the other one being tall and very something interesting.
Sorry, please.
Of course, the fridge could have meant absolutely nothing, and she just could have been making small talk because she was afraid of talking about what she really wanted to talk about.
That's possible, but I guess the thought is, and this is a question, isn't it, about how much what I say now is coming too much from within the more psychoanalytic frame. The idea is that even if she's making small talk, or she's lying, or it's a dream, or whatever, there's something interesting about it, telling me about this fridge. And there's an idea that something leaks into the fridge in some way. Do you see that?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how you unpack it. Unpack the fridge. Really, yeah.
I wondered about the idea of, you know, and was it a new fridge and was it replacing something? And something about things being replaced in her life, you know, that you remind her of her father in some way, that he's a bit like you and the people that she lives with. And this fridge, I imagine, might be a replacement of sorts. It's there because something happened to the old fridge. And so I'm just curious about things being replaced and them not feeling fulfilled in the replacement.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And that makes me think about the masculine and feminine. I mean, the idea that your name had to mean you were a woman.
Yes.
I don't know if I quite bought that almost. As in the idea that she absolutely knew that to be the case, but there's something about that.
I've had it a few times that people have decided that Onel is a woman's name, and so it's not surprising for me.
Okay.
And I find it convincing that she might have thought that because it happened a few times.
Okay.
But also, who knows what exactly to make of what she said to me. And I'm sure you're right too. There are all sorts of things about what she doesn't want to talk about, which I think I'm going to go on to sort of just say a little bit about, maybe. Let me just try and skip some of this because I've just got too much of it. I want to say that there are three ways that I could carry on this account. Now, there is one obvious way, and I don't do it with that. There is something about father and daughter. And if you watch the Philadelphia story, you see that that's there too. And whatever I say about Nietzsche, I think might have something to do with fathers if I manage to get around to it. So there is quite a bit about fathers in particular. In what I'm saying, but the three themes that I want to pick up Do I need to pause or should I keep going? Three things I want to pick up are, first, the idea of a fit between the speaker and listener. And the fit between the speaker and listener is going to be talked about in terms of the fit between mouth and ear, which is a way Nietzsche talks about it. And I want to sort of say that the fit between the speaker and the listener might provoke a kind of getting carried away and carrying on. People saying all sorts of things going on about fridges and things like that, when being surprised. I also want to say that, of course, a failure of it, I want to say a failure of fit between mouth and ear could also be quite painful and could provoke quite a bit of talking, because there's something about you feel disappointed, frustrated, angry. Why doesn't this person get how you're talking about? Do you see what I mean? What I'm trying to say? I'm saying that a fit between the two people might provoke a getting carried away and carrying on, because you've got someone who's listening to you and they're able to hear you. But actually, the opposite, if it's the opposite, the idea that someone just isn't getting you can actually stir up someone as well, to make them want to talk more and more and get a bit sort of carried away with you then. Does that make sense? That what I've just said? Yes?
Yeah.
Good. Second theme is I want to talk about getting worked up, getting carried away, carrying on, those sort of expressions. Stuff about the fridge, stuff about what happened at the end. I say that it's often heard, experienced, or taken as an indication of some kind of intoxication, some foolishness, or its relative, all in quotes, madness. Someone just starts to talk about something, as the people say now, quite random. It seems to come out of nowhere. So that's the second theme, about getting worked up. The third theme is that we can feel that we're above intoxication, but this might indicate that we're intoxicated by the feeling that we're above intoxication. I want to say that feeling that we're above intoxication, of course, is another intoxication. And I say, for example, it could be a sign of my own vanity or intoxication with myself to think that getting carried away and carrying on is to do with how well we fit together, rather than her frustration and despair at feeling that it is impossible for me to understand anything. I want to say something briefly about Sartre, and there's a quote from Nausea where he writes, "Yesterday, I didn't even have the excuse of drunkenness. I got worked up like a fool. I need to clean myself up with abstract thought, as transparent as water." That's Sartre, that's Nausea at page 62. I think there's much that could be made of this idea that we get worked up, even without the excuse of having drunk something, and we get worked up, we carry on. But I think Sartre helps us to say that the cleaning ourselves up with abstract thought could well be a way of getting worked up and carrying on. I think he helps us to say something about that. I think he helps us to say that, that there is a way in which, in groups of psychotherapists, that we are trained to get worked up and carry on in a particular way, or we're trained to explain or try to sort of do something with something that happened in a particular sort of way. So I'm trying to sort of do this thing with what Sartre said.
Can I say,
Sure.
you say Being intoxicated is necessarily a bad thing.
No, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. I'm saying that the idea that we're above intoxication is a bad thing. And I think there is a question about whether or not we can ever go intoxication. Yes, and the question is whether or not we can ever not be intoxicated. I think it's the hard question. Yeah.
But sometimes it would be terrible not to be intoxicated.
I think the question is whether or not we can ever escape from it, but I'm not sure that it's necessary to say that it's a bad thing. I think the problem is the people who think that they're not, and other people are. And that's what I'm trying to think.
It's just that this English word intoxication has these negative connotations, but in Greek, you might talk about pharmacia, which can go either way. It can cure you or heal or poison you. It's not necessarily, well, toxic sounds like something very negative, but I think it's just the peculiarity of this word.
Yeah,
There is something about the drug that can be healing as well.
yeah. I mean, the word intoxication. I'm sure that's right, isn't it? That we immediately think of it as more negative. And I've been playing with words, terms like getting carried away and carried on in a way of just making it more colloquial. But I think infatuated and things like that are the same sort of words, which I think, are the words that you might think about using, talking about the Philadelphia story, for example. But it is about being a bit drunk with something, isn't it? It's what we're trying to talk about.
I'm wondering, what it might be like for a client if they feel that you're not intoxicated with them, but that, and I wonder if that can give rise to, the misfit of the ear and the mouth, that you're just not interested, you're not enlivened by them at all, and that it's just flat, you're flat, and like what that might mean for the client who feels themselves, feels, that you're flattened by them, or that they're just flat. I have some clients like that, and I know that I'm not intoxicated with them, and they never stop talking. And I just wonder if it, and I try. It's almost as hard to get intoxicated when you're not, as to stop being intoxicated when you are. And I think, there's something really awful about not being intoxicated, not being intoxicating.
No, I think you're right. And with this client, I think that there was something I found it really quite interesting. Found myself really quite engaged with. And I think you're absolutely right. When you have a client where there's just nothing. I mean, but I think that what Nietzsche does, and I think Freud too, in some ways, I think there's something about intoxication that they at least seem to sort of value.
Well, Freud seemed to get very intoxicated with himself and also with the client, but maybe with himself. But one of the things I wondered was, you speak a lot about, your role as a dad figure to this girl, but I wondered if there was anything, because there's an intoxication around, which is more of an erotic kind of transference, and that therefore, or that's problematic in some way, and that therefore the father is stressed. Don't mean stressed out, but the notion of the father is stressed, but whether there might have been something for her as well about that triangle between her mum and dad, and that there might have been some sort of erotic stuff going on there. And she's young, isn't she? And so it's, I don't know. I just wondered if there was any part of that.
I don't doubt it. I think that's absolutely right. I think there's something. Part of my comment about being forced up in something in the room, I think it's a sort of veiled reference to that. And when she talks about boys and men not noticing her, I'm thinking, what does notice mean? That sort of stuff. Am I noticing her? Am I sitting noticing?
Yeah. She's got to get you intoxicated.
Well, she's got, I think that's right, she has to do something to them, make,
Yeah.
make, and she does, and talking about her sometimes later.
Yes, yeah. She's got to get you interested so you might stay.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the sexual something and dad and stuff, I'm not sure that one so much hides the other. I think that sexual something is in. what's
And
going on.
yeah. It's probably in the fridge.
So anyway, I'm probably going to take more time than I can't take more time than I've got, and I'm restricted. Okay, so I tried to say something maybe about Nietzsche and Freud, and I'm not. This is not going to be so successful, I imagine. But I begin with a quote from Plato. In Phaedrus, Socrates says, "That would have been fine. That would have been fine to say if madness were bad, pure and simple. But in fact, the best things we have come from madness when it is given as a gift of the god. The prophetess of Delphi and the priestess of Dodona are out of their minds when they perform that fine work of theirs for all Greece, either for an individual person or for a whole city. But they accomplish little or nothing when they're in control of themselves." So I'm starting there because the idea that madness might be divine or intoxicating, divine intoxication, I suppose, rather than clearly a misfortune or a disaster, and that being out of our minds may be fruitful and fulfilling, is at least as old as Plato. In fact, I mean, I haven't written this, but I think there's a way in which we get to we can think of all the way up to Winnicott's comment about Winnicott says we are poor indeed if we are only sane, which I think captures something very, very sort of similar. So in what I've said about my meeting with the client, I've suggested that my client seems to be she takes her getting carried away as something a bit embarrassing, shameful, and I think of her as taking up a rather superior position with herself. That she shouldn't show those sort of feelings, like really wanting another appointment, for example, or being really upset, or at the end of the session. That's what I think of it, which isn't to say it's right. And I think rather than it being disaster, I think of it as opening up a door onto her desires and her pains. This, you know, this getting carried away, which she does. I think it's informative. And it is a sign of a kind of vitality. It's where the life is in some ways. Now, many practitioners who are familiar with psychoanalysis would probably want to say at this point that Freud is the obvious person to turn to when we're talking about intoxication or getting carried away and carrying on. And I think that's because they would say something about the unconscious or the id or infantile sexuality. But Freud seems to tell us that we are beings that are more than open to intoxication, all too ready to get carried away and carry on. But civilization, society, or parents, having other plans for us, set about a sobering, alienating process, so that the we that identifies with society, can be more in control of our tendency to be intoxicated by sex and violence. This initiation into keeping it clean, sober, and safe, Freud and Adam Phillips, seems to say, is central to robbing us of our infantile, disruptive vitality, which helps us to indulge our curiosity and enjoy our life. There's lots more, and I will have to cut it short because I worry about just giving too much. But I guess I'm thinking that getting carried away and carrying on could be a way of talking about free association, couldn't it? It could be a way of sort of Freud invents, as he would like to say, a situation in which people are encouraged to sort of just speak, get carried away, get lost, and not worry about whether or not they sound a bit mad. So it's a kind of invitation. I'm not going to talk about apocalypse too much.
Onel,
40 minutes, thank you.
Onel,
Yes.
is it possible to somehow think about when Nietzsche talks about the Dionysian and the Apollonian, as the Dionysian belonging to the free association?
I'm sorry, as
The Dionysian, I think
Yes,
because
yes.
intoxication, yeah,
yes,
as thinking about free association, but also in that way linking to the libido. The free association is somehow connected to erotic desire.
can you tell me a bit more how it's connected? I'm sure it is. I mean, I think
Well,
I mean, I can get
Because you were saying that intoxication is connected to free association, if I understand it correctly, what you're saying?
yes, a free association is a sort of encouragement or invitation to get intoxicated. To allow
That's right,
yourself
and
to
I'm
get
saying that intoxication is also connected to the libidinal, to the erotic. And
Yes.
maybe in the desire to free associate is essentially an erotic desire. And it's sort of you and the client. It's a kind of playing this game, agreeing to enter this space.
Yeah, it's a kind of given an invitation into this space, isn't it? Or do you think?
Yeah, but there is something. There is a sort of intimacy, well, sensual, sexual intimacy in free associating together.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want to deny that in some, but I want to say something about there is a kind of intimacy in speaking to people and in just sort of speaking quite freely and just going on. So in and outside of the consulting room, I want to sort of say that's why I'm playing around with that phrase of getting carried away and carrying on, because I want to sort of think of free association as a version of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wonder whether it can be more filtered though when you're in social situations than in the consulting room.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the more intimate the social situation,
Yeah,
the more indiscreet you might be,
especially if you had a drink.
especially if you had a few drinks or whatever, or especially if you think that you feel that the person is listening to you. I'm sure that we probably say all kinds of things to friends, who are listening to us, and we think we're probably not going to worry that we said something that sounds a bit gross.
It makes me wonder then if you're trying to think of which is the sort of upper umbrella that contains which, maybe erotic encounters, sexual encounters are actually a means of us trying to get at some kind of free association. Maybe free associating that intimacy between. I certainly know throughout my 20s, before I met my partner, I did a lot of freely associating with people through sex. What I was trying to do is probably now what I'm doing in a more intimate sense with my clients.
But you see, I mean, I'm probably a bit sort of unsure what to say, because I think of it's too complicated actually when I think about it, because I think there is something, isn't there, about how we associate with other people, And I don't know how, there's always a question about how free it is, which we get into all sorts of, and how much we feel compelled to.
Yeah.
But the compulsion, I want to say, is part of that intoxication.
Right.
Anyway. I don't know if any of that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I think so.
I mean, there is stuff about Dionysus and Apollo which I haven't tried to talk about. You know, I just haven't, because it took me somewhere else. And I mean, Nietzsche was writing this stuff about Dionysus and Apollo, and the idea that the Dionysian aspect of us is sort of it's a more rational aspect of us, and it's one that's more concerned, I think, more concerned with what he calls form, if I remember correctly. But and the Apollonian aspect is more that. And it's the Dionysian aspect, which is about getting carried away and carried on, about not only the god of wine, but he has a group of followers who are the revelers, who are cantics, I think, and they follow along Dionysus, and they're in this intoxicated state, and they're known to rip men into pieces. Actually, I think that one of the I think I've read somewhere about. Anyway, I remember them ripping to pieces, but I wasn't really wanting to talk about that so much. I mean, to me, that's about the kind of getting carried away with something sort of intoxicated. I wanted to talk more about how Freud and Nietzsche wanted to talk to us about the intoxication of thinking of ourselves as children of an omniscient, omnipotent God. I think both Freud and Nietzsche try to open this up and try to wonder with us. Well, I think maybe I'm putting it too softly there, but they want to say to both of them that what we call rationality is not primary and central. It's a relatively feeble and late coming, and it's only often it's only just about able to keep our earlier desires and preoccupations in check, just about, and maybe and sometimes not, of course. Okay. I won't say more, try and say more about that. I want to just say a couple of things about two pieces of Nietzsche's work. One of them is with the gay science, the most quoted bit of Nietzsche's work is the section called The Madman in the Gay Science. And I also want to talk about the prologue to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I say that both of them both of them have the structure of someone who is said to be mad, approaching a group of people who are thought to be, say, normal, sane. Yeah, both of them interesting. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think of the prologue as continuing what happens, what starts off in the gay science. The one who is regarded as mad is often regarded so because they are carried away by what their listener doesn't take to be important. They're going on about something that people wonder what the hell are they going on about that for. So the madman in the gay science is a madman who approaches people in the marketplace. He runs in with a lantern, a lit lantern, and he's crying, "I seek God, I seek God." And this provokes a lot of laughter and ridicule from people who are there, who don't believe in God. We might say they're rather sort of practical, they don't have much time for religion. And you know, there's all sorts of crises that Nietzsche is going on about the death of God and how it is the end of how it is the event of all events, you know, and how what I think Nietzsche is saying partly is something to do with how we are not children of this omnipotent, omniscient God. You know, how we are more insignificant than we want to think we are. How we're on a little rock somewhere in what might be called the pool of the universe, just floating around. And we have these sort of fantasies about how sort of wonderful. You know, I think that's what he's sort of doing. And he's saying this is a terrible thing in the sense that actually now we get it. We haven't got it before. And I think that he's trying to say something about the terrible loss to people who don't see it as a loss. And that's part of why he's mad. You see what I mean? The idea is that the madness is something to do with your being absolutely preoccupied, consumed with something that other people don't see as important. What's he on about God for? I want to just say put something very quickly then about the prologue to Zarathustra. And as I say, I think of it as a continuation of the Madman. The story is that Zarathustra walks into the marketplace again. As I say, I don't think it's a coincidence. And there's stuff about he's a solitary individual who's heard that God is dead. And or rather, he knows that God is dead, or he thinks that God is dead, or he says that God is dead. I don't know it's the best way to talk about it. And he wants to talk to the people in the marketplace about the importance of remaining faithful to the earth, of valuing the body, rather than being enticed by other worldly preoccupations, and talking about the soul as if the soul is a thing that exists. He tells the people that their frugality is part of their problem. It's what keeps them small and safe. That's their problem. And he asks, where then is the lightning to lick you with his tongue? Where is the madness with which you must be inoculated? But of course, what happens is that the people laugh at him. They laugh at this crazy man who is saying all sorts of things. And he's trying to say, being a human being or human beings, it's a becoming. It's full of possibilities. There are all sorts of things. What are we going to do to sort of overcome what we are? And they don't understand what he's on about. He then decides that what he must do, Zarathustra does, is to tell people about the most despicable human being that they could be. And he starts to do this. And he talks about the last or ultimate human. He's a creature who doesn't feel, doesn't create, doesn't yearn. He has a nice, small, frugal life of conformity. And he's huddled together with other people. And he has a pill for everything disagreeable. And he has all sorts of things that Nietzsche says, or Zarathustra says, that this person lives in a place where everybody is the same, and anyone who tries to be different goes voluntarily into a madhouse. You've got to be the same. And they say, we've invented happiness, and they blink, I think Zarathustra says. But you see, the point is, the point of this story, if there is a point, is that they say, basically, bring us on. We really want to be the last man. Can you turn us into last human beings, please? And Zarathustra is presenting this as the most despicable thing that could happen. But that's what they want. Anyway, there is ice, he says, in their laughter. They really feel contemptuous of him. And I want to say, of course, one question is whether or not we are the last human beings, actually. And I think every time we hear ourselves wondering about that, we might wonder if there's also a pill for that to stop us wondering too much about whether we are the last human beings. Anyway, that's about as much as I want to do on Nietzsche. Actually. Can I pause for a second and let you say something to me? Or to anybody?
Are you saying that that's what therapy is for? Stop us wondering if we are the last human being.
To allow us.
But you know, it could be either.
It could be both.
Isn't that the point? It could be either. It could be a way to stop us thinking, you know, or you know, it could be a way of helping us to become the last human beings, or it could be a way of sort of trying to sort of tackle some of that, isn't it? Isn't it?
Certainly could be a way of ensuring that there's no real action building around.
What's that done?
So I think could be a way, you know, as psychotherapy, counseling, whatever, psychoanalysis is a way of reducing the chance of anything really happening on a social, political level.
Diffusing the bomb.
Well, I think some people think therapy is meant to make you feel better, don't they? They say things like that, and they say they're not sure they want to come back because actually they don't feel better. I don't think no.
Yeah.
And I mean that's part of what therapists I think is talking about. You know, it's a nice little pill to make you feel better. You know, and that must be good for them.
So how do you sell that?
How do you sell it?
Come to therapy to feel worse, like,
Or come to therapy to feel.
To fail, yeah.
Just don't mention that.
is that what it's?
Yeah.
But it becomes clear. You don't have to sell it. It becomes clear. Sometimes as early as the first few minutes. If you don't say, and how are you? And what's going on for you? Would you like to tell me this? Do you want to fill in this form with me? Just leave the silence pretty soon.
But they come to something.
You see,
They
so,
come to
But they don't
better.
know what do they?
Well, I think that's what people think they come for, to feel better, no?
Then I think we have to be very careful with that.
So we hold the secret.
I
Come
don't.
to feel better, but really.
You're
that's
gonna feel
not what they
worse.
thought.
I'm very upfront with my clients saying that I'm not here to help them. I'm here to just hopefully somehow facilitate some process where you will be able to get a different perspective about yourself.
I think saying that even is quite helpful.
Yeah, maybe it is, but I just and maybe even the way I said it there isn't the right way to say it, but there is something about not selling them that you're trying to fix something, or that we're not there to cure or help, because we're not, because we can't. That's not our job. And I think that would be an intoxication. We'd almost be in saying that we can help others in that way. We are saying we're above intoxication of the sort, you know, that we are the ones who can hand out the cure, you know, kind of thing. That we therefore must be cured.
But are you getting intoxicated with your not being able to help?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, surely. Like Onel saying, we're all permanently in.
I can't help you.
Yeah,
You know, it's another
But you're gonna
kind of form of because we don't
but we
know.
can't not be intoxicated.
But you know that you can't help.
No, I'm not saying that I can't help. I'm saying it's not my job. It's not my main focus to help the person. That's up to their experience. My goal is not to put an agenda of helping them in.
Well, your goal is to have no goal
Yeah, exactly.
or expectation.
Yes,
Mm.
but you do need to soften the blow slightly.
You are saying that this is a massive ego trip.
I think
But-
it might be. Yes, just like
but it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think
all of us.
that we might worry about how much we feel that we should be honest, whatever that means, at the beginning of the session, and say all sorts of things. And I think there's something about whether or not we might get caught up in something about this is what I do, this is what I'm selling you. And I don't even know actually what when you meet someone what's going to happen next. And I think one of the things that that therapy might be about. I don't know if it is the thing. One of the things is that it might well be an invitation to get a bit carried away and get sort of caught up in all sorts of things and expose all sorts of intoxicated sort of, but how would you say that to someone at the beginning?
Yeah, I know.
I don't.
Because I'm being pedantic. Like, you get an email.
Well,
Gosh, I think help me. No.
I
But you don't know that.
But come anyway.
I think
Give me money.
I think
So I can go out and drink. Do you know what I mean? Like, I get intoxicated. I'm being pedantic. Yeah.
So what would you say? Yes, I can help.
Sometimes you could say, what
Yeah,
do
we
I
can certainly
think?
try.
I think I.
you don't know.
You don't
You
know.
don't know.
I don't think you can say,
You
why
can
don't you
say,
come
yeah,
and see me?
I don't know if I can help you.
Why don't you come and see me?
You don't know. You need to have an engagement with the
Yeah.
person.
Could you say, I'm here to help you become mad?
Probably not the most helpful thing you could say, but,
But trust me on that
you
one.
know, but there is something.
I
isn't
do
there,
know
about-
that.
There is something about people might, in therapy might become more in touch with the side of themselves which they think is mad. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, I think.
But I think it's not really a good sales pitch, is it? It's not really the sort of thing that you want to lead with, I think.
No, but are people coming because there's this thing that they can't cope with about themselves or about something that's mad in their life?
Well, they might be coming for all sorts of things.
Sure,
mightn't
sure.
they? All sorts.
But something's unmanageable or something that feels.
You're offering a place where they invite you to sort of engage with that, as opposed to shut up about it.
Yeah.
But I do think, like you were saying, that it's at least kind of advertised as something that's going to help you. So the doctor will send patient and say, all right, you can have some antidepressant, but you also need to go and see someone else to feel better. And that's the sort of feel better. And then they come and think they're going to feel better. I'm not saying it is the right thing, but I think it's often advertised.
Has anybody heard, there's a podcast with Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell. And if you're too tight to pay for the non-advertising one, and Alistair Campbell, who has had many struggles with his own mental health and is quite open about it, is obviously being paid to do an advert for a therapy organisation. And it is honestly worth listening to because it sounds so awful.
Is it BetterHelp?
BetterHelp.
Yeah, it's on so many podcasts.
Bloody BetterHelp. And he says, and he's really out, and you can tell that he's thinking this is bollocks. And it said, and if you want a solution, go to BetterHelp. You don't even have to be seen. You can go online, you can do a phone call. There's someone there who can help you to make it better.
And they say, and if you don't like that person, change a bunch of times.
Yes.
Keep changing until you find somebody who.
Well, I mean,
It's gonna be
in a way,
It's just incredible. You just hear it.
for some reason, I think this takes us right back, of course, to Zarathustra and the idea that you need a pill for everything, or you have a
Yes.
sort of
Yeah.
go to BetterHelp.
Yes. Yes, as you said. Sometimes we all need somebody in our corner.
No amount of therapy can going to help Alistair Campbell for starting the Iraq war.
Well,
Before
maybe he took it, maybe
about
it's a therapist's
the Philadelphia story.
I think we probably should
Yeah.
talk about the Philadelphia story
Yeah.
on the grounds that we've only got another 15 minutes or so. So, I mean, I could go on about that, but I imagine most of you've seen it, haven't you? So, maybe I don't need to say too much about it. Do I need to say anything about it?
Yes.
Okay. I want to say what I've tried to do with it is to say I'm not going to give you an account of what R.D. Laing and his colleagues did in London in 1965 when they set up the Philadelphia Association, which is an organization psychotherapy organization to question established ways of thinking about and responding to distress. And I suspect there was a bit of alcohol and other such stuff involved in what was going on in the 60s, in the swinging 60s. Maybe it's what made the 60s swing with all of that stuff. Anyway, but I think there are questions out there about what happened there and who did what and all the rest of it. and how much of this is a private matter or how much of this is a public matter. This is a link to the Philadelphia story, because I think one of the things that's going on in that story is that we're invited to be quite voyeuristic, I think, to go into this sort of very big house with all these very wealthy people and all the sort of things that are going on, and they play with us a lot because there are cameras. There's a lovely scene where the ex. Do I need to tell you who's who? You all know who's who. Yeah, there's a lovely scene where the ex-husband Dexter Haven is meeting George Ketteridge, the potential new husband, and I think they come with what he says what to want, and I think the Dexter Haven character says it's like Lee and Grant, and I think Lee and Grant are of course these two generals from the north and the south, and there's all sorts of references, and as they're shaking hands, the camera clicks, and there's an exchange with Tracy Lord and Dexter Haven, where it's really very it's quite aggressive. But actually, every time the camera is about to click, they pose. So there's all this stuff about the camera intruding, and about how the photographer and the writer come to be at the house. I think you probably would all get the story that there was a pretty nasty breakup between the husband and wife, between Tracy Lord and Dexter Haven, and that first scene is quite a scene, where he comes stomping out of the house with carrying his bags, and he goes towards the car, and he looks absolutely furious. Now, I thought to myself, I wonder what we'd say to someone who says, well, I don't think he looks furious. I wonder what we'd, I find myself thinking about that sort of stuff, because I think if you watch films, if you see people, you would know that he was very, very angry. And she comes out, smiling, and the music changes a bit, lightens, there are strings, and you think, something conciliatory. But actually, she dumps his stuff in front of him. She dumps his golf bag before taking out a golf club, snaps it over her leg with a bit of smile, and throws it in front of him and marches on. And he actually is ready at boiling point. He charges after her and is about to thump her, and actually pushes her instead. That's the first scene. It's a wordless first scene, and I think that matters. They don't talk to each other. There's something going on about these are people who can't talk to each other. They're not the ears for each other's mouths, or the mouths for each other. Their ears. They can't do that. Is one of the first things about the film, I think. What else should I tell you about the film? I think the film has a lot to do with intoxication. Can you miss that? There's so much going on. Dexter Haven, the husband, his alcoholism is very much part of the problem in their marriage. He has a version of things which is about how I think his alcoholism is linked to what was going on with him and his wife. There is a scene where Catherine Hepburn character Tracy Lord and Mike, the reporter, are, let's say, flirting. They're doing something which is about, I think, they're intoxicated. I think they get really sort of carried away with each other. And of course, drink is part of that. They've been drinking, quite heavily. Also, there is a comment that is made in the film. The really important thing for her ex-husband Dexter Haven is that one night she got very drunk, the Tracy Lord character, and she danced naked on the roof, howling at the moon. And she says to him, why do you keep on remember? I can't remember how she says it, but why do you keep on bringing up that stupid story? I tell you, I don't remember it. And he of course says it's very important. And I think we might get the idea from that she the things that are inconvenient for her to remember about herself, she doesn't. I think that's one of the things that's implied. And she forgets that night. There's a night where that same night, actually, not many nights in the film, that same night where she and Mike they get drunk together and they play around together, they have a kiss and they go off to the pool. She can't remember anything. She doesn't remember what's happened. And I think there is something about how she's good at forgetting things. Her ex-husband says something about her drawing a tidy blank. She's very good at drawing a tidy blank of things. So I want to sort of say that the notion of intoxication, I think, is absolutely there. There is this thing about wealth and about how we get sort of interested in wealth and the rich and famous, which I think is very much part of the film. And the character Mike Macaulay Connor, he is incredibly contemptuous of these rich people with these really ridiculous names. And I think of him as with the Tracy Lord character as being someone who is intoxicated with the idea that they are above intoxication. Mike sees the world, I think, as it is. He wants to talk straight to his editor. He wants to, it's a bit of a joke because he's part of he goes in for Spy magazine to this house to spy on the people in there, but he's contemptuous of them. So I think of this film as trying to say something about how the Tracy Lord character, which there's so much to be said about women, gender, sexuality, all of that in the film. There's a lot, but I think there's something, isn't there, about how she begins to understand something about herself, or begins to come to terms with something about herself, about how she likes this other woman that she becomes when she's been drinking. I think that scene where there is, I'm talking to you as if you all know it, but there is a scene where they kiss, they run off to the pool, they jump into the pool, and he's coming back and he's carrying her like a baby and singing. And of course, in front of him is the ex-husband and the husband-to-be. Probably not the best situation to find yourself in. And I think there is a line in which she says something like, that Dexter Haven, that her ex-husband, is concerned about her, which I think is interesting. He says, "Is she all right?" And she says, "Not wounded, sire, but dead," which I think is a nice line. And apparently, Stanley Cavell says that he spent ages looking for that line. And I think it's Elizabeth Barrett Brown in found it. And he says that, of course, this woman is based on, she's one of the wealthy families in Philadelphia. She would have had a very good education, and she would know people like Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And so I think with Dexter Haven. So in a way, they can have this exchange with each other about something which I think Catchwig wouldn't know, and maybe Mike doesn't know either. There's something about the film and how they're able to talk to each other.
They're like gods, and they often refer. He often says, "You just want to be a god. You think you're like a god.
Absolutely.
You can't stand your own vulnerability." And it reminds me of Nietzsche because it's almost like he wants to kill God, the God that's her. He talks about her and she talks about him as thinking he's a god as well.
Yes.
So it's a bit like Olympus, isn't it, where they're all.
Yes. Tracy Lord and Dexter Haven, it means wonderful. And I think you're right that there's something, isn't it, that both her father and her ex-husband say this thing to her, which is really quite devastating.
Yes.
I think that she's a wonderful woman, but she mars. She
hasn't got a heart.
She hasn't got a heart. But
that's what they say to her.
They say she has a religion of strength, basically. They say that
she can't stand vulnerability.
She can't stand vulnerability. And clearly there's something that she can't stand in other people.
But particularly in herself.
and particularly in herself, and there's something about her fall from grace, isn't there? You know, that according to her, which she thinks at one stage that this man she's just met on the eve of her wedding, she's gone up to the pool and slept and had sex.
Yeah.
You know, and and what's interesting about what's interesting about this is that she wants to confess this to Dexter, not to George. She forgot about George altogether, and he's the one she wants to confess to and to ask for forgiveness from, and you know, to ask, what am I going to do? He says to her, well, where do I come in? I don't come, you know, I don't fit in it anymore. Anyway, I'm just sort of saying to you that this film has all the sort of elements that I think.
What seems important as well is that all the men are interchangeable with your client. You were interchangeable with the father. That seems quite important too.
Do you think the men are interchangeable?
In the film, yeah, because the uncle is the father at one point,
see
and
what
then
you mean.
the
That's what you mean.
lovers. And you with your client was the father. That seems like.
I've not thought about that. I've not thought about the interchangeability of the men. The men in the film strike me as very different. The father and the uncle, whatever, what's his name? His name is Willie, Uncle Willie, interestingly enough. He's a pincher. You know, he pinches women. I mean, it's an interesting film. You know,
Pinching and punching women.
it's pinching and punching. It goes on.
Her love is sort of on whoever.
She's freely associating between many men.
Well, I think there's one way of reading it, and I'm sure there are many ways of reading it.
She says that she wants to be loved, not worshipped.
Yes, I think George has the idea that he says to her, "I'm going to pitch you in an ivory tower," whatever it is, and she says, "Well, that's funny." She doesn't. She's lived in that all her life. You know, she's a very wealthy woman, and she wants to do something. Sorry,
I want to be loved, truly loved.
well, that's what she
The
says.
gilded cage.
But sorry, there's also something about, is it Dexter, the reporter?
No, he's Mike. Yeah.
Sorry, Mike,
Yes.
the reporter. How he looks at this family and think they are sort of selfish
Yes.
and materialistic, and yet he treats the photographer appallingly.
He does treat her very badly. I think there's something about
And she accepts it. Yeah, and in the end she goes, I better take it before anyone else does. And you think, what? Yeah.
he
But
does.
he's despised all these other people who are.
Well, you see, I think there's something about how he's so much in love with himself. That's what I think. I think that, and that's part of the intoxication. I say this stuff about being intoxicated with this idea that you're above intoxication. He thinks he's superior to all the rich people. But there's a lovely scene there, where the first one, the early scenes, where he comes into the house, and they're talking about they've got an extension of the stable so they can talk to the horses and all that kind of stuff. And he goes in and he looks at all the jewelry and stuff that's on the silver and stuff, and he picks up a spoon and he picks up something else, and then the camera pans out, and there's a butler standing there watching, and there's something about he's suddenly being caught. What it's suddenly it's something about being watched, isn't it? That when you don't think that you are, and he then feels kind of guilty, like they're accusing me of stealing. But I think there's something about whether or not he really does want some of this one. I think he's really struggling with himself about it. Anyway. Sorry, another bit.
Thank
So-
you. Yeah, really, really good.
Yeah. I could say a bit more. Okay. There were things about how Tracy Lord taunts Mike about how much he's in his head in that scene, the scene before they go off to the pool, and basically she manages to say to him just what her father and her ex-husband have said to her. Isn't that interesting? That she manages to sort of suddenly she finds herself and she catches herself getting carried away. You'll never be a fine human being unless you have some regard for human And then she says something like, isn't it, the geraniums are lovely, but she suddenly sort of realizes, oh my God, look what I'm saying, you know. So I think it's so interesting all of that. Anyway, I want to just sort of say, the reference to feet of clay has taken me back to Nietzsche. She says, Tracy Lord, when she is being carried up to bed by mine, who's going to deposit her in her bed and come down and then get hit by her ex-husband. She says, feet of clay, I've got feet of clay, something like that. And Stanley Cavell interprets that as saying, she's saying I'm subject to design. And I think that's right, maybe. But I think there is probably more than that. There is a feet of clay is a reference that Nietzsche makes in 1888 in Ecce Homo. And Nietzsche writes, the last thing I should promise is to improve mankind. Tracy Lord is someone who really wants to be useful. She wants to sort of be on the right side of history. She wants to do something with her life. Nietzsche says, no new idols are erected by me. Let the old ones learn what feet of clay mean. Overthrowing idols, my word for ideals, that comes closer to being part of my craft. And I think Tracy Lord might be heard as saying that she's been overthrown or defeated, not wounded, sire, but dead. And I think there's something how much Nietzsche wants to show us that we have to remind us that we have flaws, you know, that we are not gods. I mean, God is dead, and you know, we shouldn't think of ourselves as God. I tried to finish this by going back to saying something about the Philadelphia Association, because that's how the story and the association are in my mind. Writing of Pyrrhonian skepticism, one of the founding members of the Philadelphia Association, John Heaton, tells us that a philosopher was said to have cured Alexander the Great from thinking he's a god. Being more attentive to the intoxication of feeling that we are above intoxication may not cure anyone of anything, but it might help to make us more attentive to what we do.
No, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Our next actual seminar is I think on the 2nd of February, and it's Rosie Risk. We'll be talking about transparency matters. Actually, Rosie's new book's just come out, Fiction to Psychoanalysis, so that might be by Christmas. So, yeah, for our guests here, thanks very much for coming. We're having a break now, and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Ornell, I just want to say parenthetically that I'm calling in from Philadelphia, 20 miles from where that was filmed.
Oh, well, great.
wow.
Absolutely great. Oh,
We met at John's Memorial.
Right.
we met at John's Memorial, so I can't quite see because it's Tom.
Bartlett.
Right.
Yes.
Good to see you again.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for doing this.